The day Daniel returned home, nobody recognized him. Not because his face had changed, but because the man standing at the gate looked like a beggar. His clothes were old and torn, his slippers were almost broken, his beard was rough and untrimmed, dust covered his hair. Yet the house he was standing in front of, he had built it. The car parked inside the compound, he had paid for it. The children playing in the yard, he had been sending money for their school fees. But on that day, as Daniel stood quietly at the gate, nobody opened the door for him. Instead, someone shouted from inside the compound, "Hey, beggar, move away from this place!" Daniel did not answer. He only lowered his head and smiled sadly, because this was exactly what he came to see. He had not returned home for celebration, he had returned for a test. And before the sun would set that day, the truth about his family would break his heart. Many years earlier, Daniel was the hope of his family. He grew up in a small village where life was never easy. His father was a farmer, but the farm did not produce much. His mother sold vegetables by the roadside. Daniel had 3 younger sisters and 1 younger brother. Every day the family struggled. Sometimes they ate only once a day. Sometimes they went to bed hungry. But Daniel was different from the other boys in the village. He worked hard, very hard. After school, while other boys were playing football, Daniel would help his father on the farm. At night, he studied with a small lantern. He always told his mother something. "Don't worry, Mama, one day things will change." His mother would smile and touch his head. "God will bless you, my son." But nobody knew how hard Daniel was praying for that change. When Daniel turned 25, an opportunity came. A man in the village told him about a job abroad. The work was not easy. It was construction work in a faraway country, but the pay was good. Daniel did not think twice. He wanted to change his family's life. Before he left, his mother cried, "Daniel, the world outside is not easy." Daniel hugged her. "I will be fine, Mama, I promise." His father said something serious. "Remember your family. Do not forget us." Daniel looked at his parents with determination. "I will never forget." And he kept that promise. Life abroad was very difficult at first. Daniel worked long hours, sometimes 14 hours a day. The sun was hot, the work was heavy. Sometimes his hands bled from lifting blocks and iron. But every time he felt tired, he remembered his family, and he continued. At the end of his first month, he sent money home. His mother called him. "My son, we received the money." Her voice was full of happiness. "With this, we have repaired the roof." Daniel smiled. "Good, Mama. Take care of yourself." But that was only the beginning. Soon Daniel began sending money every month. He paid his sister's school fees. He helped his brother start a small business. He built a new house for his parents. He even bought them a car. In the village, people started talking. Daniel is a good son. Daniel is the pride of his family. His parents were proud. His siblings praised him. Every time Daniel called, they spoke sweet words. "Brother, you are the best. We love you. You are our blessing." Daniel believed every word. He believed his family loved him deeply. But there was one person who loved him even before he had money. Her name was Grace. Grace and Daniel had known each other since childhood. She lived in the same village. She was quiet, kind, and hard-working. When Daniel was still poor, Grace never looked down on him. She believed in him. Before he traveled abroad, Daniel had visited her one evening. They sat under a mango tree. "Grace," he said softly. "Yes?" I'm going far away." She nodded slowly. "I know." Daniel looked at her seriously. "I want to come back successful. Then I will marry you." Grace smiled shyly. "I will wait." Daniel never forgot those words. Even when he was far away, Grace still called him sometimes. But unlike the others, she never asked him for money. She only asked one question: "Are you okay?" Daniel always felt peace whenever he spoke with her. Years passed. Daniel continued working. He became richer. He opened businesses for his brother. He built houses for his parents. But slowly, something began to change. Whenever his family called him, the conversations were always about money. "Daniel, send money for this." "Daniel, we need money for that." "Daniel, transfer money quickly." At first, Daniel did not mind. He was happy to help. But one day, something happened. Daniel had a small accident at work. He injured his leg. For 2 months, he could not work properly, so his income reduced. That month, he sent less money home. Immediately, his brother called him. "Daniel, what is this small money you sent?" Daniel was surprised. "I had an accident." His brother sounded annoyed. "But we needed more money." Daniel stayed silent. For the first time, something inside his heart felt strange. Not one person asked him if he was okay. They only talked about money. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling and asked himself a question. Do they really love me, or do they only love my money? That question refused to leave his mind. Days passed, weeks passed, and slowly an idea began to grow in his heart. A dangerous idea, a painful test. One evening, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. He spoke quietly to himself. I need to know the truth. If he continued sending money, everyone would keep smiling. Everyone would keep praising him. But he wanted to know something deeper. Would they still love him if he had nothing? Would they still accept him if he returned home poor? Or would they reject him? That night, Daniel made a decision. He would go back home, but not as the rich son everyone knew. He would return like a poor stranger. He would wear old clothes. He would hide his wealth, and he would watch how his own family treated him. Only one person knew about his plan: Grace. When Daniel told her on the phone, she became worried. Daniel, that test will hurt you. Daniel sighed. I need to know the truth. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, No matter what happens, I will stand with you. Daniel smiled. Those words gave him strength. A week later, Daniel packed his bags, but instead of expensive clothes, he packed something else. Old shirts, torn trousers, worn-out slippers. He looked at himself in the mirror. Even he could barely recognize the man staring back. Then he whispered something. Let the truth show itself. And the next morning, Daniel boarded a plane, heading back to the village he had sacrificed everything for. But what waited for him there would break his heart in ways he never expected. Because the moment he stepped into his family compound, someone would shout a sentence that would change everything. Beggar, leave this place! And Daniel would finally begin to understand what money can hide. Daniel stood quietly outside the gate of his family house. The sun was hot above his head. Dust moved slowly with the wind. He looked at the tall building inside the compound, the same house he had built with his money, the house his parents now lived in proudly. But today, Daniel did not look like the owner of that house. He looked like a man who had slept on the streets. His shirt was old, his trousers were faded, his slippers were almost broken. He took a deep breath and knocked on the gate. For a moment, there was silence. Then footsteps approached. The gate opened slightly. Standing there was his younger brother, Samuel. Samuel looked at Daniel from head to toe with disgust. "Hey, what do you want?" he asked rudely. Daniel lowered his voice. I came to see my family." Samuel frowned. "What family?" Daniel looked into his brother's face. "I am Daniel." For a second, Samuel stared at him carefully. Then suddenly he laughed loudly. "Daniel? You?" He laughed again, shaking his head. "Our brother Daniel is rich and lives abroad. He does not look like a roadside beggar like you." Daniel's heart tightened inside his chest, but he kept his face calm. "It is me," Daniel said softly. Samuel became angry. "Stop lying! Leave this place before I call the security." Daniel tried again. "Samuel, look at my face carefully." But Samuel did not even try. Instead, he pushed the gate wider and shouted toward the house. "Mama, Papa, come and see this crazy man claiming to be Daniel." The family comes out. Soon, Daniel's mother came out of the house. Behind her was his father. 2 of his sisters followed. They all stood in the compound staring at him. Daniel felt his heart beating fast. These were the people he had sacrificed everything for. He had worked under the hot sun for them. He had sent money for their comfort. He had missed birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings because he was working for them. Now they were looking at him like a stranger. His mother squinted her eyes. "Who are you?" Daniel spoke slowly. "Mama, it's me." She frowned. "Don't call me Mama." Samuel laughed again. "This man says he is Daniel." The sisters joined the laughter. "Look at him. Our brother Daniel would never look like this." His father stepped closer. He looked at Daniel carefully. For a moment, Daniel thought maybe his father would recognize him, but instead his father shook his head. "You are not my son." Those words cut Daniel like a knife. His father continued, "My son is a successful man abroad. He sends money home every month." Then his father pointed toward the gate. "Leave this place before I lose my patience." Daniel swallowed the pain in his throat. "Papa, please listen to me." But Samuel stepped forward angrily. "Didn't you hear him? Leave!" He grabbed Daniel's arm and pushed him outside the gate. The metal gate slammed shut. Daniel stood outside, alone. Inside the compound, he could hear them talking. "Some beggars are very bold these days." "Yes, imagine pretending to be our son." Daniel slowly sat on a stone by the road. His chest felt heavy. But something worse happened. Inside the compound, he heard his mother say something. "Thank God our real Daniel is rich. Imagine if he became poor like that man." Those words broke something deep inside him. The village rumors. Soon, neighbors began noticing the strange man sitting near the house. People whispered as they passed. "Who is that?" "I think he is a beggar." "Maybe he came to ask Daniel's family for money." Daniel kept quiet. He watched people walk past him. Children stared at him. Some even laughed. Hours passed. Not one person from his family came to check on him, not even to ask if he was hungry. As the sun slowly began to go down, Daniel stood up. He began walking slowly through the village. Everything looked familiar, but somehow it felt different now. Cold, strange. The unexpected meeting. As Daniel walked down the dusty road, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Daniel?" He stopped walking. Slowly, he turned around. Standing there was Grace. She was carrying a basket from the market. Her eyes were wide with shock. For a moment she could not speak. Then she rushed toward him. "Daniel, is it really you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." Grace looked at his clothes and her eyes filled with tears. "What happened to you?" Daniel forced a small smile. "Nothing happened." Grace shook her head. "You are lying." She looked toward the direction of his family house. "Did they reject you?" Daniel did not answer. His silence was enough. Grace wiped her tears quickly. "Come with me," she said firmly. Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to disturb you." "You are not disturbing me," she said. "Come." She took his hand and led him toward her small house. Grace's kindness. Grace's house was simple, very small, but it was clean and warm. She brought a bowl of water. "Wash your face first." Daniel washed the dust from his face. Then she brought food, simple food, rice and stew. Daniel stared at the plate for a moment. It had been a long time since someone served him food with this kind of care. "Eat," Grace said gently. As Daniel began eating, Grace watched him quietly. After a few minutes, she spoke softly. "Your family didn't recognize you?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "They refused to believe it was me." Grace sighed deeply. "I warned you this test would hurt." Daniel nodded. "But I needed to see the truth." Grace looked at him carefully. "What will you do now?" Daniel leaned back in the chair. His eyes were calm but serious. "The test is not over yet." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked toward the window. "The whole village believes Daniel is rich." He paused. "But what happens when they think Daniel has lost everything?" Grace slowly began to understand. "You are going to continue pretending?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled sadly. "Well, you will not sleep outside." Daniel looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you." Grace shook her head. "You once promised to marry me when you returned." Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes." Grace looked directly into his eyes. "I did not promise to marry you because of your money." Her voice became soft. "I promised because of you." Daniel felt something warm in his heart. For the first time since he arrived in the village, he felt peace. But the next day would bring something unexpected, because news would spread across the village that Daniel had returned home poor. And when his family heard the news again, their reaction would become even more shocking. But they had no idea the man they had rejected at their gate was still the one who owned everything they were enjoying. And very soon, the truth would come out. That night, Daniel slept in Grace's small house. The room was quiet. Outside, the village was peaceful. But inside Daniel's heart, many thoughts moved like a storm. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. He remembered the moment his brother pushed him out of the gate. He remembered the laughter of his sisters. He remembered his father saying, "You are not my son." But the words that hurt him the most were from his mother. "Thank God our real Daniel is rich." Daniel closed his eyes slowly. For years he had worked like a machine, day and night, through heat, through pain, through loneliness, all for his family. He had believed they loved him, but now he was beginning to see something painful. Sometimes people love the comfort you bring, not the person you are. But one thing still surprised him: Grace. She had not asked about his money. She had not complained about his appearance. She had simply said, "Come inside." Daniel sighed quietly. Then he whispered to himself, "The test will end soon." The news begins to spread. The next morning, the village woke up with fresh gossip. People were already talking. "Did you hear? They say Daniel returned to the village, but someone said he came back poor." Others shook their heads. "That cannot be true. Daniel is rich abroad." But rumors travel fast in small villages. Soon the story reached Daniel's family house again. Samuel was sitting outside when a neighbor approached him. "I saw that strange man again yesterday," the neighbor said. Samuel laughed. "The madman who claimed to be my brother?" The neighbor scratched his head. "I don't know, but he looked very much like Daniel." Samuel waved his hand dismissively. "Impossible." Inside the house, Daniel's mother heard the conversation. She walked outside quickly. "What are you people talking about?" The neighbor repeated the story. For a moment, the mother felt uneasy. She remembered the man's eyes the previous day. They had looked familiar. But she quickly pushed the thought away. "No," she said firmly. "My son Daniel is successful abroad. That man is just a beggar." Samuel nodded. "Exactly." But even as they spoke confidently, a small seed of doubt had quietly entered their hearts. Daniel continues the test. Grace was preparing breakfast when she noticed him sitting outside thoughtfully. "You were thinking again," she said gently. Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes." Grace sat beside him. "What will you do today?" Daniel looked toward the road. "I will walk around the village." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Looking like that?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Grace sighed. "Then be ready for more insults." Daniel stood up calmly. "That is part of the test." Grace looked at him carefully. "You are stronger than I thought." Daniel smiled. "No." He paused. "I am just determined to see the truth clearly." The second humiliation. Later that day, Daniel walked past his family house again. Samuel was outside with some friends. The moment Samuel saw him, his face turned hard. "You again?" His friends turned to look. Samuel laughed loudly. "This man came yesterday claiming he was my rich brother." The friends burst into laughter. One of them said mockingly, "Then where is your private jet?" Another said, "Maybe the jet crashed." Everyone laughed again. Daniel stood quietly. He did not defend himself. Samuel stepped closer angrily. "Didn't I warn you yesterday?" He pointed toward the road. "If you come near this house again, I will beat you." At that moment, Daniel's father came outside. "What is happening?" Samuel pointed at Daniel. "That madman again." The father looked irritated. "Why are you still here?" Daniel looked straight into his father's eyes. For a moment, something inside the father seemed to move, but Samuel spoke quickly. "He's just a stubborn beggar." The father waved his hand impatiently. "Chase him away." Samuel pushed Daniel again. "Go!" Daniel stumbled slightly, but did not fight back. He simply turned and walked away slowly. Behind him, the laughter continued. But something had already begun changing in the village. Some people were watching carefully, and they were starting to feel uncomfortable. The unexpected arrival. 2 days later, something unusual happened. A black luxury car drove into the village. The car stopped in front of Daniel's family house. People gathered quickly. The driver stepped out. He was wearing a neat suit. Samuel walked forward confidently. "Who are you looking for?" The driver looked around calmly. "I am looking for Mr. Daniel." Samuel laughed proudly. "That is my brother." The driver nodded. "Good." Then he opened the back door of the car and brought out a briefcase. "I came from the city," he continued calmly. "Your brother asked me to bring some important documents." Samuel's chest swelled with pride. "You see," he told the crowd, "my brother is a very important man." The driver looked confused. "But where is he?" Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" The driver looked around again. "Mr. Daniel told me he arrived in this village 3 days ago." Samuel froze. "What?" The father stepped forward. "That is impossible." The driver opened the briefcase and brought out a photo. "Is this your son?" Everyone looked at the photo. It was Daniel, their Daniel. The father's face slowly turned pale. "Yes, that is him." The driver nodded. "Then where is he?" The mother suddenly remembered the man at the gate. Her hands began to shake. "No," Samuel whispered slowly. "That beggar." The entire compound became silent. The truth revealed. At that moment, another figure appeared at the end of the road. People began whispering, "Look, isn't that the same man?" Daniel was walking slowly toward the compound, but this time he was not alone. Grace was walking beside him. The crowd parted quietly as they approached. Samuel stared at Daniel with wide eyes. The father looked frozen. The mother covered her mouth with her hands. The driver smiled respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." Then he bowed slightly. "Mr. Daniel." The entire village gasped. Samuel felt his legs become weak. The father lowered his head slowly. The mother began to cry. Daniel looked around at everyone calmly. Then he spoke quietly. "Yes, I am Daniel." Nobody could speak. The silence was heavy. Daniel continued, "I came home 3 days ago." His eyes moved from one family member to another, but nobody welcomed me. His voice was not angry, but it carried deep sadness. "I was pushed away from the house I built." His brother could not lift his head. His father's shoulders trembled. Daniel then turned toward Grace. "But one person welcomed me." Grace stood quietly beside him. Daniel looked back at the crowd. "That is why I made this test." He paused. "I wanted to know who loved me and who loved my money." No one could look into his eyes. The truth was standing clearly in front of everyone. The shame. Daniel's mother fell to her knees. "My son, forgive us." His father stepped forward slowly. "We did not recognize you." Samuel whispered with shame, "I am sorry." But Daniel raised his hand gently. "I am not angry." He looked at them calmly. "But now I know the truth." Then he turned toward Grace. He held her hand. "This is the woman who accepted me when everyone rejected me." The village people began nodding slowly. They had seen everything. Daniel looked at his family one last time. "I will still help you." Their heads lifted with surprise. "But things will change." Then he smiled gently, because love must never depend on money. As Daniel stood there holding Grace's hand, the whole village was quiet. Nobody spoke. Everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. Daniel looked at the house again, the same house he had built with years of sweat and sacrifice. For so long he believed that the love inside that house was real, but now he understood something he had never fully seen before. Sometimes people celebrate you when life is good and money is flowing. They call you their pride. They call you their blessing. But the moment the money disappears, the love also begins to fade. Daniel was not angry anymore. The test had already shown him everything he needed to know. Because in the middle of rejection, humiliation, and laughter, one person still opened the door for him. One person did not ask about his money. One person only cared about the man standing in front of her. And that person was Grace. That day, Daniel learned something that many people spend their whole lives trying to understand. Money can attract people. Success can bring many voices around you. But true love, True loyalty only reveals itself when everything else is gone. And sometimes the person who stands beside you when you have nothing is the same person who deserves to stand beside you when you finally have everything.